All right, welcome to the study group. Welcome, Chuck.
Thank you, Derek.
Welcome, Kitty. Welcome, everyone at home. Welcome, people on the UBN app who are practicing out a live stream today. Kind of exciting, breaking new grounds. There's a Urantia Book Network app that's out now. It's free for Android and iPhone, so go ahead and download it. We'll be putting up all sorts of content, as well as there's opportunities for you guys to meet with each other, sell things on the marketplace, have study groups. It's going to be awesome.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big party.
Yeah.
And part of that, the whole concept behind having an opportunity to share a platform like that is to uplift the quality of thinking on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that both Chuck and myself have committed to for ourselves and for our planet. And that's basically why we're doing this next study group. It's a 2-part series on real thinking. So the Urantia Book talks about certain qualities of thinking, and as we progress, we're progressing spiritually. So our thoughts are ideally beginning to reflect more spirit reality and more of perfection, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just kind of like a 101 kind of introduction, and then we'll move on a little bit of our real spiritualized thinking.
Mm-hmm.
If you have something you want to add to that. But
Yeah. Well, here on the title slide, we have this quote: "So few mortals are real thinkers." So here we have the revelators, our superhuman sponsors, friends, and overseers challenging us in a way, throwing down the gauntlet here, saying, come on, you can strengthen your thinking. You can get better at thinking. Your thinking can become more real. So this is what we're trying to get a grip on here with this study group. What do they mean by real thinking? I mean, one way I think to understand that is thinking that helps us to connect with reality and even become more real. Mm-hmm. And we'll see how that works as we as we get into this.
Yeah, it's just a disclaimer. As we talk about more real, we mean more spiritual.
Right.
Closer to spirit.
Right. As we come closer to God, we become more real. So the one best way we have to do that is through our thinking, where we express our intention, where we communicate with God, our prayer and worship life, and all of that is all tied in with the quality of our thinking.
Yeah. And how sincere we are within that,
mm-hmm.
the authenticity of one's own expression and decisions.
Yes, exactly.
Well, do you want to maybe take us through a couple of these definitions before we get into the slide? So
just as an orientation to get into this, I've listed a few definitions. I'll just read these quickly, but they'll come up through both part 1 that we're doing in this study group, and then we're going to continue in a part 2. So keep these in mind. So these are kind of the factors that shape our thinking process, and they're sort of in an order, but not exactly. But attention is a big part of it. So that's a state or act or state of applying the mind to something. Concentration of the mind on a single object or thought, a capacity to maintain selective or sustained concentration. So that's a really crucial factor in all this. Recognition, then, is defined as the identification of something as having been previously seen or heard, the perception of something as existing or true. So recognition is a big part of our thinking process. And then principles, this to me is probably the most intriguing of all on this list. And they define principle as a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. So all three of those are tied up with our thinking processes, but they're guided. That process is guided by the principles we hold in our mind. So we'll get a little more into that as we go along. And then combined with that is the idea of upholding standards. So a standard is a level of quality or attainment used as a basis for judgment or evaluation. So if we're going to evaluate our thinking or use thinking to evaluate something else, tied in with that is having a sense of standards. So standards evolve as we move through life and gain more and more experience. And then we have evaluation, which is determination of value, nature, character, significance, worth, or quality of something or someone. So evaluation is where spirit comes in, where we bring values to bear on our thinking when we're evaluating. And then finally, all of this leads to decisions. So decisions here is a decision here is defined as a determination arrived at after consideration to make a final choice or judgment. So typically decision follows evaluation, and then all these other processes lead up to that.
Totally.
So remember these as we're going forward, because some of all of these terms will come up at least once.
Yeah, we might reference them and call back to them.
Sure.
Yeah. So let me just get started with some of these slides and you get an idea of how we're kind of evolving this.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to just start from paper 16. And they're saying, it is sad to record that so few persons on Urantia take delight in cultivating qualities of courageous and independent cosmic thinking. I'm going to continue all three of these. At first, life was a struggle for existence. Now, for a standard of living. Next, it will be for quality of thinking, the coming earthly goal of human existence. And the third one here is, the divine spirit makes contact with mortal man in the realm of the highest and most spiritualized thinking. So to me, all of this kind of touches on this standard that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's a standard, a quality standard that is part of our evolution. And we see it more coming now as we're evolving further into the future here. We're seeing how important that keeping that quality of thinking really is. If you think about how it says that first it was for a standard of living, now it's a quality of thinking or a standard of thinking,
right?
Essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And so, you can defend one's family, you can defend yourself, you can have your own place where you can live and thrive. It's the same thing in the internal temple here.
Mm-hmm. Right. To be aware that we have to guard and direct our thinking and educate it and uplift it and cultivate it so that we can begin to achieve some of these qualities. And that first little quote there, the qualities of courageous and independent cosmic thinking. I mean, that really strikes me. It really.
Yeah, we could do a whole podcast.
I know we could do a whole thing on that. I mean, that's sort of what we're doing. But that's, again, throwing down the gauntlet. It's a challenge to us to say, look, come on, you can be more courageous. You can be more independent in your thinking.
Yeah, I like that too, because it's so easy to kind of hide behind the security of belief and just being like, I believe in celestials and now I'm done. But it's like, how far are you going to get? Like, how far are you going to push it? It's like you go to the gym and you just got to the gym. Now what are you going to do?
Mm-hmm. Right. So, and this idea of there's so much, these words that are used here, like taking delight. Like this is not a chore. This is something that uplifts us, and we feel good when we can achieve this. So there's a delightfulness to this quality of thinking, and it's something that we can cultivate. So there's a feeling there of being alive. You cultivate a garden or something like that our thinking grows and takes on these higher qualities.
And then when we get to that higher quality, spirit is right there to meet us.
Right. But in many ways, it requires independence and courage to get there. Jesus would often talk about having originality, initiative and originality were two of the big messages that Jesus would talk about. And it's all tied in with this. So we take initiative in our thinking. We don't just absorb what comes in from the outside. There's so many messages hitting us all the time through the media and friends and who knows where else. But it's up to us to evaluate those messages and decide if they're really something we want to go with or not.
Right.
Not just automatically fall into patterns that other people may be trying to manipulate us into.
Yeah, the discernment of values. And here we are with a fragment of God within us, helping us, but yet the decisions are ours to make.
Right. That's our responsibility.
Right. So we have a role to play with the divine indwelling within us.
Exactly.
We're not just giving it up and giving up our own free will for all of this.
Right. So in this last quote, the third one there, they're just telling us if we can elevate our thinking, like you just said, the spirit will be there to meet us and work with us in almost, in a real partnership sense. I mean, particularly within, with God within and the Spirit of Truth with us, and even the Holy Spirit kind of pervading.
Yeah, what a friend. I mean, it's so counterintuitive. You think of friends in the material sense, and Jesus instructed his apostles to introduce God as a friend.
Exactly. Yeah.
Here we have this spiritual terrain to traverse, and God has hooked us up with a lot of gifts, as a good friend would.
A lot of tools.
Mm-hmm.
We just have to learn how to use them.
Yeah. Okay, well, let me go into this next one.
Sure.
So, in our learning to discern how to use them here, recognition is the intellectual process of fitting the sensory impressions received from the external world into the memory patterns of the individual. Understanding connotes that these recognized sensory impressions and their associated memory patterns have become integrated or organized into a dynamic network of principles. And this last quote here on paper 195, love is the true guide to real insight. So when we're talking about insight in this intellectual recognition of what's going on inside, the thought adjusters flashing us things, our natural evolution of consciousness of what our creativity presents for us, and that it all kind of, as we start to understand this stuff, we start to understand that as these patterns get integrated into our being, we're embodying this stuff, it's only working through love. It's because of love that we're allowed to be able to do this, so that we can share these real meanings and values with one another, because love is the source. So this insight is coming from love. Ideally.
Yeah, right. And love can be thought of as a principle.
Right.
So when they're talking here about, this definition of principle once again is a fundamental truth or proposition that serves as the foundation for a system of belief or behavior or for a chain of reasoning. So we can see how important that is. So when they talk about having a dynamic network of principles, this is something that evolves in our thinking, as time goes by, and from experience largely, and then also from spiritual insight that's given from within. So all of our, in this recognition of inputs, it's not, there's sensory, but then there's value inputs, there's the things that we see in the world, and there's a whole range of possibilities covered in this, in that first sentence. And then the idea that we can understand the things that we experience, our ability to do that has to do with putting together within our minds this association of memories and impressions and all of that, but within a framework of evaluation that's based on principles.
Right.
So the principles become the guide for our thinking in a sense, and love then becomes the highest guide.
And that's how then we're discerning values and meanings from things through those principles.
Yeah. So if you're trying to make a decision about something, is this loving? Does this express love? Does this fulfill love somehow in some way? So love and service are closely tied together.
Sure.
So that's kind of, and then we bring God into it. We talk it over with God,
Yeah.
And then we get real insights, because insight comes from spirit. It's a gift. But we have to prepare the soil of conditions in our mind to receive that gift. In other words, we have to want to have these higher insights.
And to step up to it.
Right,
exactly. I think that, this love is not a passive thing. It's a quite dynamic lived truth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you don't meet it halfway, then you're not dancing with it. You're just wanting it to do everything for you.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's like this idea of a dynamic network of principles.
Right.
So our values have a coherence to them. They almost have like an architecture.
Yeah, it reminds me of a dynamic, structured philosophy of living.
Yeah, yeah. You think about like a cheetah or some animal, that can bound across the countryside, right? That their organism, their muscles and everything has been integrated and organized into a dynamic potential for that kind of activity, to be able to run like that. So if you think about that as a metaphor for our thinking or our thoughts, we want to kind of do the same thing in our minds. We want to be able to run in our minds and be able to cover ground and make progress and have new realizations. And all of that has to do with this dynamic network of principles.
And one has to be liberated in order to do that.
Right. And you have to be willing. It can be work, obviously.
Yeah.
Brain work is real work. It actually burns calories.
Well, the whole concept that our whole goal is to get off this planet in soul form. So it doesn't just happen. You got to do some work.
Yeah. You got to become more something more than what we are.
All right. Well, you want to go into this one?
Yeah. So here we have a little more instruction about all this. It's from paper 101, one of the religion papers in the Urantia Book, where they say that the soundness of the soundness of philosophic conclusions depends on keen, honest, and discriminating thinking. Keen, honest, and discriminating thinking in connection with sensitivity to meanings and accuracy of evaluation. A lot of guidance in those few words. New systems, so if we do this, and following from that, new systems of values come into existence. New formulations of principles and standards are achieved. Habits and ideals are reshaped. Some idea of a personal God is attained, followed by enlarging concepts of relationship thereto.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so they're really mapping out the terrain here and our potential for achievement as we navigate these possibilities and learn to use the tools that we've been given.
Yeah, I love this. New formulations of principles and standards are achieved. But I especially like habits and ideals are reshaped.
Yeah. I mean, just think about the extent.
You're being reformed. You're being remolded from spirit now.
Yeah, exactly.
It's a different artist working on you.
Well, if we think about how much of our lives are kind of predictable or flow in patterns of habits, in habit patterns, that to be able to reshape those habits sometimes is super important because we can, we all drift into bad habits.
And it takes time with all these things too. It's not like you just make the decision and now it's a habit.
Yeah.
Like you got to like embody it and integrate it.
You got to be consistent and committed and determined and all of that. And then we can create new and better habits.
But then I will say from experience of developing positive habits is that while it seemed rigorous at first, it becomes a delight, like the Urantia Book says. It's a delight to be so advanced in certain things that you've worked so hard at.
Right. And once you get to this place where you have some idea of a personal God, right? That's where our habits, if we cultivate a habit of just thinking about God, at least a few times a day or all the time, that's going to have a inherently uplifting effect.
Yeah.
On absolutely. Everything.
Yeah. What are you tuning to?
Right. What are you tuning to? Right. Tuning to the God channel. It's being broadcast within our minds.
Okay. Well, it kind of rolls into this next one.
Yeah.
Here.
Let's go on to the next one. Okay. So this is super interesting, I think, how these three tie together. Very much of an adult's thinking is mentally carried on in conversational form. The doing of the will of God is nothing more or less than an exhibition of creature willingness to share the inner life with God. Self-consciousness is, in essence, a communal consciousness. God and man, Father and Son, Creator and creature.
I love that one.
Yeah, me too. But starting off with this idea that thinking is often carried on in conversational form. I mean, we can certainly experience that and realize and appreciate that in our own conversations with each other. When you're actually talking to someone, you have to focus your thinking.
Sure.
You have to decide what you're going to say, right? And you respond to what the other person is saying. So there's a
attention there.
There's an attention there and a cultivation of standards that can also be cultivated in our relationship with God. Right. Which is what they're suggesting here by sharing our inner life with God. So share that inner conversation with God. Bring God in, not to say that he couldn't be listening already if he wanted to, but if we become aware that we have God's attention by giving our attention to God, that kind of creates the synapse or the energetic connection where all kinds of incoming can uplift our thinking.
Yeah, it makes me think of like the only really limitation of us receiving God's gifts and ministry is on us.
Mm-hmm.
It's not like he's not pouring it out.
No, it's always there. Yeah. And then this last thought, just when I just found this last quote recently, and it really has changed my I don't know, even my day-to-day experience of being alive, this idea that self-consciousness is in essence a communal consciousness. So they talk about Jesus having unbroken communion with God. That's the sense of what they mean there, I think, when they use the word communal consciousness. But it's inherent. I mean, God is with us. So when we realize that this, there's a partnership going on in our thinking, it's God and man, Father and Son, creator and creature, however, that I'm not alone within my mind. I'm not just bouncing off the walls of my cranium. I'm actually connected energetically and spiritually. All the circuits we've talked about before, like with the Adjunct Mind Spirits and the Holy Spirit and all these others, the endowments that we're given from within and with us all the time are part of what creates this feeling of, I'm part of a community.
Yeah, it makes me think of, this I'm not alone thing, and all these maybe young children wandering in a dark house alone, afraid of the dark, and not realizing that they can turn on the lights, that the light is already there for them, that they aren't alone. What was perceived as being alone and going through these material shadows of fear and anxiety, you can flip those lights on, turn your attention to the light of all, the light of the world.
Exactly.
And you can have an opportunity to kind of overcome these things and to grow into more realistic reflections.
Yeah, I'm sure we've all seen the surveys or reports about, epidemic of loneliness. That a high percentage of people alive today report that they're lonely and they don't really have close friends. I mean, it's a very sad state of affairs.
But it's a very real thing. It's pervasive right now.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Yeah. So this is kind of an antidote to that. This realization that your consciousness of yourself is really not just of yourself. It's of yourself and all the endowments that you've been given to even have that realization. Like in one of our recent podcasts, we were talking about the mind circuits from the Mother Spirit are actually a level of consciousness, a level of her consciousness. So our consciousness is her consciousness.
Yeah.
Just by being conscious, we're conscious of her.
It's shared always.
Yeah, always shared. And then the adjuster presence of the Father within, sort of, similar in the sense that there's a companionship there.
Yeah, and I would say, Chuck, I appreciate the way that you reflect that too as a friend. You share that in a kind way, because somewhere in the Urantia Book it says knowledge isn't possessed without the ability to teach that knowledge, and that real knowledge is shared through love. And so it's really important to keep that loving saturation for demonstration for people and inspiration, as opposed to just rules. Because the love is what inspires the principles for people to act on their own accord.
Exactly.
With spirit.
Yeah. And our motivation to share our inner life with God is motivated by love. It's because we love God. It's like our best friend or something. You want to share every thought with God.
Yeah.
Because he's with us and he cares the most.
And we care what he thinks.
Yeah. And we get feedback too, value feedback. So that's what's kind of wrapped up in all of this. It's not a burden, in other words. It's not a chore.
It's a delight.
It's a delight. And this realization of communal self-consciousness is also a delight. And it all kind of goes together.
Amen. Well, thank you, Chuck, for helping us uplift our quality of thinking on this one. And I pray that all of you re-engage in your friendship with the Father and internally, and remember that you're never alone. And if you have any questions or any concerns, feel free to reach out to us, and we're your friends, and we'll help out if we can, or steer you in the right direction, because that's what this is all about. And if you haven't downloaded the app yet, download the app, Urantia Book Network, on the Apple Store and Google Play. And thanks to you guys, if you were watching the live stream, it'll be archived on the app so you can watch it later. And we'll upload maybe a higher res version with the slides to come.
Oh, okay.
So stay tuned. We're going to do another part, Real Thinking Part 2, right after this.
All righty.
So thank you, Chuck. Thank you, Kitty. Thank you, everyone at home. God bless you.
Yeah, always thanks for joining us. We really appreciate feedback and comments and suggestions.
Yeah. Keep the family growing.
Yeah.
All right. We'll see you next time.